Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, you should spend money on yourself, but you should do it in a way that doesn't harm you financially because so many people go overboard, overspend, and then run into financial problems. But it is possible to spend money on yourself or treat yourself without running into financial problems. You just have to establish some rules on yourself. And so in this video, I want to talk about 10 frugal living rules when it comes to spending money on yourself that you should follow in order to not run into financial problems. And the first rule is be intentional. Oftentimes when people hear the word frugality, they associate it with the word cheap. Trying to spend the least amount of money possible on everything, but frugality should really be associated with the word intention. When you're frugal, you're just intentional with how you spend your money because most people have no intention when they spend their money. I mean, think about the last time you went shopping at a store. The majority of people did not walk in the store with intention, as if they're asleep and just buying for the sake of buying. Whenever I spend money on myself, a rule I have is just to always be intentional when I'm spending money. I mean, if I go into a store like Target, I know what I came in for and I'm not just impulse shopping. If you spend your money intentionally, you'll find that you'll always be able to get whatever you want, but you'll naturally just spend less. Now, the second rule is treat yourself instead of creating habits. Almost every morning, I make either eggs or oatmeal for breakfast. But some mornings the thought of these things doesn't sound too appealing, and whenever I feel this way, I decide to treat myself to a spicy Chick-fil-A biscuit and hash browns for about $6. And I really enjoy it. It's a special treat that I give myself about once a week, but it's just that, a treat. It's something I do on occasion, and a big problem that people have with money is instead of treating themselves every now and then, they've created a habit. And their habit makes them overspend. For example, treating yourself to breakfast at Chick-fil-A once a week is $312 a year, whereas the habit of getting Chick-fil-A every work morning is $1,560. Another rule I have when I spend money on myself is to treat treats as treats. Instead of being in the habit of doing things all the time, I only do them on occasion, which one, allows me to enjoy it more, and two, prevents me from overspending. Now the third rule is buy complexity. I enjoy eating out every now and then, but when I eat out, it's normally just for lunch or dinner. Because breakfast is very easy to make. I mean, making scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit takes about 10 minutes to prepare, versus a dinner can take an hour to prepare. However, sometimes I do enjoy getting breakfast out, but a rule that I set on myself is to always buy something that would be very hard to make on my own. For example, if I get breakfast out, I will not get something simple like scrambled eggs and toast because I can make that in about 10 minutes, but I will get something complex like Eggs Benedict because it's harder to make. Making Eggs Benedict at home is an undertaking, and I'd rather just pay someone else to do it. And whenever I decide to spend money on myself, I always try to buy complex things that I can't really do on my own. That way I maximize the money that I'm spending. Now the fourth rule is maximize your lazy return. Sometimes in life, you feel very lazy and just want to treat yourself to make things easier. Maybe you worked a hard day, and instead of cooking and doing dishes, you just get takeout. And we should treat ourselves by taking the easier route every now and then. But one rule that I set on myself whenever I feel lazy is to get the biggest return possible. For example, a takeout meal might cost $15, but by spending that money, I don't have to cook the food and do dishes, which might be an hour of effort. I'm getting a big return on my money, whereas if I feel lazy and decide to get a to-go coffee for $7, making the coffee only takes about 5 minutes of effort. Although it is more convenient, I'm not getting a really big return because making a cup of coffee doesn't require that much effort. And so whenever I do decide to be lazy, I always try to maximize what I'm spending my money on. Like spending money to avoid the hour's worth of effort to make a meal versus the 5 minutes of effort to make a cup of coffee. Now, the fifth rule is make the most out of every purchase. Now, I do think that paying for a cup of coffee out of convenience is a waste of money, but I don't think that paying for a cup of coffee is a waste of money. Because for me, getting a cup of coffee is not really about the coffee, but it's about the experience of getting out of my house, being in a cozy environment, and working and relaxing. It's about getting that experience. And another rule I have when I'm spending money on myself is to always make the most out of every purchase. For example, if I get a coffee, I'm going to spend an hour enjoying the coffee shop experience. I'm making the most out of that purchase when I buy a cup of coffee. And when I make the most out of everything that I spend my money on, I never feel like I'm wasting money. Now, the sixth rule is buy more experiences and less stuff. When I spend money on myself, I always try to buy more experiences and less stuff. Because I believe that experiences are an investment that continue to bring joy in your life. For example, if you buy a concert ticket, you will enjoy the show in the moment, but 10 years later, you will still have the memory of the experience. Long after the show ends, you will still have that experience of going to the concert. Whereas if you buy an expensive pair of shoes, you will enjoy it for 6 months, but 10 years later, you won't remember the shoes. Buying stuff isn't bad, but one rule I have when I spend money on myself is to spend more money on experiences and less money on stuff, because experiences bring you lifelong memories, whereas stuff doesn't. Now, the seventh rule is know if the spending is ending or beginning at the initial purchase. So if you watch my channel, you know that I recently moved across the country. But I have an even bigger life update, ladies and gentlemen. I recently made a huge purchase that changed my life. But before I tell you what it is, I first need to tell you my rule. Before I make a big purchase, I always ask myself the question, does the spending end or begin with the initial purchase? Because sometimes we can buy things and the spending just begins at the initial purchase. And so my purchase was a dog. I recently got this dog and her name is Star. And you know how much she cost me? $100. Which is not a lot, but that is just the start of my spending on her, because for the rest of her life, I'm going to have to spend money on food, vet visits, and medicine. The spending doesn't end at the initial purchase, but it begins at the initial purchase. And that was something that I had to consider before I made the decision to get a dog. But whenever you make a big purchase in life, I think it's important to ask yourself the question, does the spending end or begin with the initial purchase? Because you don't want to commit to something that you're not financially prepared for. Now, my eighth rule is don't live your life based on someone else's expectations. So when you put yourself out there on the internet, like I'm doing right now, you do have to deal with some judgment and criticism every now and then. And this is something I don't have to deal with much, but when I do, it happens when I least expect it. For example, I recently made this video, and I talked about enjoying getting a dishwasher at my new place. Pretty harmless statement, I thought. But I got a lot of negative comments from people calling me lazy, a hypocrite, and my favorite, liar, liar, pants on fire. It was a passionate comment section, but I love having a dishwasher. It saves me so much time, and after 10 years of hand washing my dishes, I'm ready for a machine to do it. And one rule that I set on myself, especially in this YouTube world, is just to stay true to myself and not let other people's expectations dictate my decisions. I mean, if everyone is saying that frugal people don't own dishwashers and wash by hand, I'm not just going to blindly agree and join the crowd. I'm going to spend my money on things that bring value into my life. Now let's see what this comment section looks like. Now, the ninth rule is don't center your decisions around math. When it comes to talking about money, we often focus on the math side of money. For example, people often say don't buy lattes because if you invest that money, you could become a millionaire in 40 years. Which is true, but I don't think that's a healthy way to live your life because you could not do anything fun, save all your money, and be a millionaire in 40 years. But what kind of life is that? It sounds like a pretty dull life to me. And one rule that I set on myself when I'm spending money on myself is not to base every decision off mathematics, but to focus on what brings value in my life. And use money as a tool to bring value in my life. I think that's a much healthier way to look at money. Now, the final rule is break the rules. Now, I want to end this video saying that rules are ultimately meant to be broken. I mean, if everyone followed the rules in society and did what they were told, life would be very boring and predictable. Some of the best things that ever happened to society were because people broke the rules. And although I set these rules on myself of how I spend money on myself, I also make sure that I break them every now and then. I get a latte for convenience, I buy a nice pair of shoes, and I get something cool I didn't intend on buying. Break the rules every now and then because if your life is extremely predictable, you're not going to live an interesting life. It's okay to break the rules if one, it doesn't harm you and others financially, and two, it doesn't become a negative habit. Follow these rules when spending money on yourself, but also break them every now and then. Because what's the point of having money if you're not enjoying the money? And with that, muchas gracias. Que tengan un buen día. Nos vemos, chicos.